which is declarations of interest. Does any colleague have a declaration of interest? No, I'm not seeing any hands going up. So we'll move on to number 3, which is minutes of the previous meeting. Are these agreed for approval?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to item number 4, which is information reports for the period 21st of April to the 25th of May 2021. And the first one, Schedule 1, is the Winter Maintenance 2020-21 Activity Review. Do you have any questions? No questions? Oh, Councillor Braze.
Yes, it's more of a comment on this one.
Right, I don't think anybody wants to ask a question, so I think we'll just move to comments. So on you go, Councillor Braze.
Okay, thanks, Convener. I'd like to thank officers for this very informative report. And I'd also again like to thank officers and staff for their fantastic response during the very challenging conditions of the winter past. But it would be remiss of me not to draw attention to the fact that the SNP's alternative budget would have made more money available for winter maintenance, not just this year, but in years to come. And the administration's budget preferred to focus on spending on the Arbroath Cycleway vanity project.
Thank you, Councillor Brace, for that comment. Anybody else like to make a comment? No. So we'll just move on then to the next information report, which is Schedule 2, Scottish Road Maintenance Condition Survey Results and Local Government Benchmarking Framework. Any questions from colleagues? Your hand's still up, Councillor Braze. Are you?
Yes, I do have a question on this.
Fire away.
Yes, Convener, road condition surveys form a very important part of decision making as to which roads we sort, how and when. Could I ask officers for a wee bit of detail on how the surveying operation is carried out in practice, please?
Thank you. Mr. Cochrane.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you, Councillor Braze. This survey, the Scottish Roads Maintenance Condition Survey, is a national survey which is taken through a contract with the Scottish Chief Officers for Transportation, Scots, and they organise this survey. This particular one is a specialist vehicle, which is probably the size of a large crew cab, sort of Luton lorry size, which has a range of lasers and measuring devices after it, and it travels around Scotland. It does something in the order of 20,000 kilometres of surveys across Scotland, of which we are, of course, a part of one. And because it's a national survey, it provides us with our performance indicator for road condition across Scotland. We don't just get the indicator from this, we also get information back on which parts of our network are green, amber or red, and we combine that with other surveys, including skid resistance surveys and our own visual inspections of the road network to then devise a works programme going forward, dependent obviously on the budget provided. I trust that assists you, Councillor Brace.
Yes, thanks. It's always good to get a wee bit of a glimpse into the actual operational side of things too. Thank you.
Any other colleagues have questions? Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, I was just looking at this report here on page 13. Well, it's page 13/14. Percentage of road networks resurfaced. You know, 40 years, once every 40 years is the recommended thing, and we're only managing once in every 94 years. It's something that we're probably never, ever going to be able to sort of get on top of, and we're just going to need to manage it as best as we can. Finances just don't allow it to happen, I suppose. But I just wondered, in relation to, what we do spend on it, the percentage that is allocated in the budget, what percentage of the roads budget is actually spent on resurfacing roads? If it's broken down, is it like 10% of the budget is spent on resurfacing, or what? And, what would it cost to do, say, double of what we're doing now? That was my first point. And then the second point was about the surface dressing that we do. It says most of the surface dressing in Angus is done on C and U-class roads. Are our streets in and around our towns, are they classed as U-class roads as well? That's my questions.
Mr. Cochrane, do you want to take that question up, or Mr. Scott, whoever, Mr. Hill, whoever's here that wants to address?
I'll happily do that, Councillor Convener. Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Stewart. I don't have those figures to hand in terms of percentage spend. As you know, the roads budget covers carriageways, footways, street lighting, drainage, bridges, as well as coast protection and flood prevention. So if you don't mind, we'll have a look at those figures and email you with those separately. Clearly, as you say, we're unable to resurface the road network at the really the design rate. When one designs a road, one designs it for 40 years. But clearly, equally, some of our roads were never really designed to any particular standard. They had become various sort of roads that have been surfaced over the years. So it is very challenging in terms of the budgets. The SRMCS does also produce figures for us, which suggests that we should be spending something in the order of £7 million a year on carriageways, but that we also have something in the order of £55 million backlog. So as you say, it's a very challenging financial situation. And sorry, could you repeat your second part of your question? I should have written it down.
Yeah, it was regarding the surface dressing that we do on C and U class roads. And I just wondered what the roads in and around the towns are classed as. Yeah, so surface dressing has traditionally been a treatment for the rural road network, but we are now bringing it into some of the urban areas. As you know, it's also called tar and chip or spray and chip. And it is a very effective measure for sealing the road surface and particularly stopping some of those amber parts of the network going red. So we are doing some of it in the urban environment, but it's really not something that's too suitable for the residential areas. I trust that helps, Councillor.
Thank you. Is that okay, Councillor Stewart?
Yep, that's grand. Thank you.
I think Councillor Durno was next.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. I noted in the report that it said that the Scottish average spend was £11,262.46, and we have only spent £6,867.92. Do you think we could get back to being the same spend as other councils with the Scottish average is 11 million? Could we possibly get to that? I know with COVID, we've had restrictions, but do you think we could possibly do the same spend as everybody else? Is that a possibility?
Mr. Cochrane, I'll let you answer that interesting question.
Thanks, Convener. Obviously, we spend our budget allocation as far as we possibly can. Last year, which this figure is the year before, it's 1920 spend. We were pretty much on target in terms of road spend. Last year, we did get impacted by COVID. Traditionally, we have been one of the lowest spending councils per kilometre of road. The LGBF figures do, however, come with a slight caveat that they also include winter maintenance spend. So obviously for councils who have the higher winter maintenance spend, particularly the northern councils, that can somewhat skew the figures. I trust that helps, Councillor Durno.
Thank you. Is that okay, Councillor Durno? Yes. I'll move on then to Councillor Duff.
Yeah, thanks, convener. I mean, I do remember several years ago in the previous administration, we did a sort of survey of road maintenance. I think Councillor Miles led that subgroup, as I remember. And at that time, I think Mr. Cochrane and his colleagues were telling us that the ideal was to resurface roads every 40 years. And at that point, we could only afford to resurface roads. I think it was about every 60 or 65 years. Now, to correct Councillor Stewart, it isn't 94 years, it's 194 years that the report references. So we've gone from being able to afford to resurface them every 60 years to every 194 years, which is 3 times worse by my simple arithmetic. And the tables on page 13 don't tell any lies. We are slipping down the league table. We used to pride ourselves in being in the upper quartile, the top 8 authorities in Scotland. We're now slipping down. We aren't spending anything like the average for Scottish councils. And Councillor Brace has well made the point about the SNP alternative budget, which would provide ongoing finance additional to roads, whereas the administration only dealt with 1 year. So, you know, there is an issue here. Angus roads are not as good as they used to be. They're getting worse. And the public will obviously blame the administration for that.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. I would just point out that the administration did put more money into roads in the budget in March than the SNP did, but I don't think that's what the public want to hear. I don't think they want to have councillors trying to outbid each other. They just want their roads sorted. So I think that's what we need to start working in partnership to actually try and achieve. But I'll move on to Councillor Cheap.
Yeah, thanks, convener. I think you just hit the nail on the head. We don't want to hear politics over this. The key thing is, Mr. Cochrane's just said, and I don't think it's anything to be proud of, no disrespect to Mr. Cochrane, this is for Angus Council, that we are traditionally one of the lowest spenders on our roads. That's not what we want to hear. It's not what the public want to hear at all. The public have priorities, and roads are one of the main priorities that affect virtually everybody. And it's always high up people's opinions. And I think we need to start to reflect that in how we carry out our work as council. And I think when the last few speakers have brought up, that was one part of the report that I really found interesting, when they said this is the base level would be once in 40 years, but we do 1 in 194 years, as Councillor Duff said. It's just unacceptable. And I think, so we really need to get our budgets more in line with public perception, public need here. I know there are competing interests, but this is what we're here for. It's to represent the public, and the public wants the quality of our roads and pavements far improved. It's become more and more noticeable over the last few years, certainly the last 4 years or so since I've been a councillor. You take much greater note of these things, and our roads have deteriorated significantly in that period. So I think it's something we need to look at. One question for Mr. Cochrane, if I may, is just if I'd like to see, how do we compare, Mr. Cochrane, then compared with, shall we say, our neighbouring councils, in that if we're every 194 years, what are our neighbouring councils achieving? If you know.
For yourself, convener, thank you, Councillor Cheap. Again, what tends to happen is these results come out to individual councils ahead of the overall position across Scotland being published. So I don't have that data at the moment. What I would say, though, is as per the table 2, we are 10th in Scotland in terms of the road condition. So we are in the top third of councils.
Thank you, Mr. Cochrane. Councillor Brace, I'm not sure if this is a legacy hand or if you're shown at top of the list. Did you have a comment or a question?
Sorry, no, I don't.
That's okay, thank you. Sorry, right, Councillor Moore, then you're next.
Thank you, convener. I'd like to go back to the surface dressing. A couple of years ago, surface dressing took place in Letham on pavements, and it was an out-and-out disaster, trailing into properties and the like. Are we avoiding doing pavements with surface dressing, or is this practice still ongoing? And if so, is it round to residential areas?
Mr. Cochrane.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. That is part of the problem of doing surface dressing in the urban environment. I'm not entirely sure with surface dressed in the traditional sense of on a footway. It may have been a slurry seal, which is also sometimes challenging in terms of getting on people's feet, or indeed dogs' paws and the likes. Again, the challenge here is about effective surface treatment, which maintains the network in a condition that we can afford to do. So we tend to use the right technique in the right place. Perhaps in that circumstance, we could have improved it.
Thank you. Is this acceptable, Councillor Moore?
Yeah, thank you.
It's Councillor Davey then next.
Thank you, Convener. It was just to sort of add to the discussion that was ongoing, and you know, on averages and how much we spend. And I think, you know, I would echo that the public's priority is to ensure that the roads are repaired. And you know, we've had experiences recently in, you know, Lunenhead with the flooding and people not being able to access Forfar, and people are concerned about these issues, and quite rightly should be expecting good services. But I think what's not been mentioned is that we are one of the lowest funded local authorities per head in Scotland. And in this last budget alone, that was worth £5 million. So if we in Angus had received the average of Scotland, not above, more just the average, we would have had £5 million more in the last budget to spend. So I think when people are looking at these issues, they'll know that 80% of our budget comes from the Scottish Government, and we are essentially left, local authorities have little power over how much money we get from the Scottish Government. So part of the issue is that we in Angus are given a raw deal from the Scottish Government, in my opinion. You know, with £5 million, as I said, in the last budget alone, if we were given the Scottish average. So I think that is just worth remembering when we discuss the quality of roads and what public services we provide, because across the North East, Aberdeenshire, Aberdeen, Angus, some of the lowest funded, as I've mentioned, across the whole of Scotland. So I think that needs addressed and that needs questioned. And indeed, I think in February this year, when I wrote to the Scottish Government to ask about whether they would consider additional winter maintenance in places such as Aberdeenshire and Angus, they said no. So I think that's worth remembering when we're discussing the budget spending and the quality of our roads in the North East.
Thank you, Councillor Davey. Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you, Convener. Just sort of a quick comment, if I may. Councillor Cheap, and it was alluded about politics in this. It's a narrative that's going to be ongoing, I think, going forward. But there was an alternative presented, and I don't actually think that reminding people that we had choices to make when it came to the budgets on this is a political thing. What Councillor Cheap just said was, where were your priorities aligned? Where were your priorities of the public? One budget addressed that, in my opinion, and one budget looked at it in a slightly different way. The point that we're making here is that we have slipped down the table to where we were historically. We have a very low spend compared to the national average. The SNP, along with others, decided that that was a priority. It's not to say whether or not it's right or wrong, it was what happened. So if you want to talk about aligning with members of the public, that's what we tried to do. And I think it's healthy to say that there was an option available for councillors to take one option or another. We decided to put an ongoing spend into a roads budget, and that's something that other councillors voted alongside us with. I don't like this pigeonholing of this is a political argument. There were choices, there were options. The administration presents a budget, we presented an alternative budget. We voted accordingly. We're just highlighting the fact that that option was there so that the members of the public can actually choose who aligns with their priorities the most.
Thank you, Councillor MacDonald. I'd just like to make the point, if you look at table 2, we've actually improved in the rankings table to number 10 in 2021. We were actually 13 in 1920 and we were 11 in 1819. So we've actually moved up 3 places in the Scottish rankings over the 32 authorities. And I would say I have a difference of opinion with yourself about the funding of roads through the budgets. I'm confident that the administration budget actually provided more funding for roads this year. But I don't want to get into an argument about that. We need to work together to how we create funding to be made available for investment in roads. But, you know, I don't want to state the obvious here that we only have so much money to spend. So if we increase it in one area, we reduce it in another area. So it does come down to priorities, and we do have important areas to look after, like children and learning, social care, mental health. There are all different areas that need funded. So when we decide we want to increase spending in one area, the obvious is we have to cut it in another area. So I don't want to labour the point, but that's just facts. Councillor Duff, I think you've spoken already, but I'll let you speak.
Thanks, Convener. I think it was really just a point of information, whether it's I don't quite know what you call it. I mean, just to pick up on Councillor Davies' points, this is the line, of course, he pushed in his election campaign, and you've got to dig into the figures. I mean, if you look at the spending or the Scottish Government allocation of money per person across all the Scottish councils, you'll find that all councils get about £1,750 per person. The only outliers are the island authorities, which get more. The money comes from two sources. It's non-domestic rates plus grant. And there's a seesaw effect there. And what Councillor Davey, of course, is focusing on is the grant element, or the non-domestic. You know, it's a package you get. And this idea that the Northeast is underfunded is it's nonsense. And even if it was true, what Councillor Davey should do is go to COSLA, because this is a COSLA agreement. And go to COSLA and say, you think Northeast is underfunded, and see where you go to. That's the correct way of addressing this one. There's a flat amount of money coming from the Scottish Government. They're not going to increase it. If you go to COSLA, then if you can get more for Angus, somebody else will get less. It's a zero-sum game. And if you think we're underfunded, go to COSLA and argue it at COSLA. It's not really an argument for the Scottish Government. They're giving us round about the same per head as all authorities. That's just really a point of information.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. I'll just remind colleagues, these are information reports, and I am being extremely generous in the length of discussion here, but it is an important subject. So, Councillor Cheap.
I'll keep it brief, Convener. Thanks for letting me to come back on this one. It just reiterates really why I'm an independent councillor. I believe that I represent the man, woman in the street who doesn't like politics in local authorities, local councils. And to remind Councillor MacDonald, the nicest way, I voted with the SNP on this because I agreed in their budget for more spend on this, but that's not the point. The point is I'm talking for the man who's not on council, the man woman on the street who use the streets and the pavements and want to see our priorities change to that. That's what I was getting at, and why I was saying remove politics from the debate here. That's the point I need to make. That's what I represent. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Right, colleagues, I think we've exhausted discussion on this one. So if we could move on to item number 5, which is membership of the MOG groups. So I'm going to take them one at a time. So let me just go to the recommendations, and I'll just explain what I'd like to do. I think we have an agreement. I have spoken with the lead. I have spoken to Councillor Devine, who was the leader at that point, and I have spoken with Councillor Cheap and Councillor Speed. So I think we do have an agreement about what I'm about to explain. So if we just agree, obviously the first one, which is to note the changes to the political balance, and 2, to note the current membership of the flood risk and road safety. And then if we could move on to item 3, which is to change them. So at the moment, if we move to the flood risk management group, we have 4 elected members. I'd like to propose that we increase that to 6 members to mirror the membership numbers in the road safety model. So that would mean that the administration would have 3 members. The SNP would move from 1 to 2 members, so they'd get an additional member, and the non-aligned would get 1 member as well. So I have had communication from Councillor Speed and Cheap that Councillor Cheap would like to put himself forward for the flood MOG, And I'd ask the SNP if they have a person that they would like to put forward, if everybody's agreeable that we move to 6 members.
Yeah, convener, can I nominate Councillor Devine for the Flood MOG?
Yeah, thank you. So can I ask colleagues if we can agree that we move to 6 members on the Flood MOG, and that Councillor Devine and Councillor Cheap join the Flood MOG to make up the 6 members? Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. If we move on to the next one, which is the Road Safety MOG, which is 6 members, if we accept the political changes, which we are and have, the administration will go from 4 to 3, and Councillor McLaren will leave the Road Safety MOG. The SNP will remain at 2, and I'm hoping that Councillor Brays and Councillor MacDonald will be remaining on it. And we would have one additional non-aligned member, and Councillor Speed has indicated that she would wish to join, and that is supported by Councillor Cheap. So can we agree with the changes I've just outlined?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. I think that report's agreed then. So if we move on to number 6, which is the Angus Local Access Forum membership update. I think this is quite a simple report. Is there any questions on this? No, any? Oh, sorry, Councillor Devine.
Yes, convener, from time to time we're asked for agreement to appoint different people onto this, and I don't suppose many of us actually know what it does and what decisions they're taking. And we were just wondering as a group whether there should be either minutes of the meeting come forward in some way or another, or maybe an information report, or even if anybody is interested in being a council observer, an elected member observer to their 1 or 2 of their meetings, that would be helpful, because I just feel that we really don't know what goes on there too much.
Great, thanks for that, Councillor Devine. I see Mr. Armstrong would like to answer that. That'd be helpful. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, convener, and thank you for the question, Councillor Devine. I think initially it would probably be helpful to bring an information report just to get visibility to the committee on the role of this group, and then beyond that, I guess we can consider those other questions that you raised, Councillor Devine, as to whether or not regular receipt of minutes of those meetings, and also, whether some kind of attendance by elected members would also be welcomed. But if I could suggest, if we bring an information report to the next Communities Committee, detailing the work of this group and the role that it plays in some of the activity that it's involved in.
I think that would be helpful. I always forget just quite how many people there are on it until you get a report like this. So yeah, that would be fine. Thank you. As a starting point.
I think that's helpful. Can we now go on to, sorry, first of all, is there anybody else got any questions or anybody got any comments before we go on to hopefully agree the recommendations? Nobody. So can we agree the recommendations 1 and 2, please, to appoint these 2 individuals?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Go on to so number 7 is possible exclusion of the public and the press. Can we agree to the exclusion of the public and the press, please?
Great.
Okay, and we'll see each other on the other side. Thank you very much.